Finally, we have the proof that Sadiq Khan is deliberately, willfully pushing white British people out of the London property market. There have been major concerns about what we've called white flight, but what in reality, I believe, is a process of ethnic cleansing. Now, I don't believe that Sadiq Khan is doing this because he particularly cares about the colour of people's skins. I believe it's because he wants to create a utopia in London, and the utopia, by his definition, will be a fully multicultural international city which will stand in firm opposition to Britain, to America, to the Anglosphere, and to the freedom, democracy and free speech that we hold dear as British people. So even though this is a video that talks about ethnicity, I think it's much more cultural than that. By the way, we already know that 7 out of 10 new social housing properties go to migrants, people who were born outside the United Kingdom. But in this video, I'm going to show you the trick that Sadiq is using, not just to pull people in with social housing, but also to push people out using the private sector. Hello everyone, thank you so much for watching this video. Please do subscribe, but more importantly, please consider a donation to the Patriot Fund. I'm going to be putting out the video tomorrow explaining what we're doing with the money. It's been a crazy journey helping people out, but I'm really enjoying doing it, and your small donations really, really count. Okay, so I found an obscure property video earlier today where the guy was talking about property yields going down 37% in London, and the way that there had been huge drops in Tower Hamlets, in Hackney and in Kensington and Chelsea. Now I thought, oh, the property people are always whinging about something, aren't they? And as you know, I've said about property people, my issue with property people is that the professional property people are not intelligent. They don't have any discernible talent. They're just so ruthless and nasty that they do anything for a quick buck. So they tend to acquire these fortunes thinking of themselves absolutely marvellous, whereas actually they're just morons who don't care about people. If you are one of those people, I'm sure you're different. But anyway, so when I watch a programme talking about property, it's my instinct to believe that a property developer is probably a see you next Tuesday. But this guy makes some really, really interesting points. He said something. The mayor had brought in the rent stabilisation initiative. And it also said, as part of the initiative, he believed that 40 to 60% of small private landlords would leave the market. The policy itself was backed by London Property Holdings, Metropolitan Residents Group and City Capital Rentals, who are big property groups. So really, really simple. Ignore the social housing for now. The mayor has brought in something called the rent stabilisation, which he says is going to reduce the total number of private landlords, small private landlords, by 40 to 60% within 6 months. And this was quote unquote expected. Well, remember what I said at the beginning of this, where the vast majority of social housing goes to people who were not born in the United Kingdom. They're increasing that, but they're reducing the number that go in the private sector. Yes, that's right. British people, people born in Britain, tend to overwhelmingly get property from the private rented sector. So you can see that how you would squeeze one side and expand the other would suddenly alter the balance. But you're thinking, this all sounds technical and dry, but I'm going to let you into an amazing secret. Have you ever noticed the way housing associations are dominated by people who are recent migrants to the country? Well, the reason I discovered here in Windsor, the real reason is this. By the way, I should say, here in Windsor, the property that I'm in, 23 flats were given over for the poor of the area, but the housing association that controls it is Pakistani run. Nothing wrong with that, you say. Why would that mean that they would be racist? Well, what they're actually able to do is this. You think that social housing is allocated based on need. It's not. Social housing is based on a decision of the housing association committee as to what need is defined as. So they have a broad legal definition, they have a housing list, but they also are the people with the discretion to decide. Now, I don't want to accuse the very nice Pakistani gentleman that runs the housing association here of doing anything other than assessing things purely on need, but isn't it remarkable that every time a British person moves out, a Pakistani person moves in, they're always the people in the greatest need according to this housing association. Now that may well be a coincidence, but if you noticed, 70% of all new social housing units at housing associations go to people who were not born in the United Kingdom. So I wonder whether in fact Sadiq and his chums have dominated all of these housing associations and they're giving out properties for years and years and years. Councillor Peter Gold in Tower Hamlets accused the housing associations controlled by Lutfur Rahman of running racist housing policies. In fact, there are some that are openly only open for Muslims. But if you look at it, they have a list of 100 people. They pick the person in most need. Wow, what a coincidence. It's never someone born in Britain. So we now know that edge of the seesaw, don't we? The massive increase in social housing paid for by you very often is going to people not born in Britain. So the next bit, well, of course, the cost of buying a house is going to increase massively because under Angela Rayner's policies, remember, they're going to make it 40-60, where 40% of houses will be social housing and 60% will be private. So what that means is, let's do the mathematics really simply, 50-50. It means if I want to buy a house now in London, I have to buy one for a migrant. Yeah, I buy two, one goes to a migrant, one goes to me. It's not hard to see how that is going to push people out of the purchase market. But now we get on to the private rented market, which is the solution for most indigenous British people, for most real Londoners, or naturally born Londoners, whatever you want to call them. Well, of course, now, with all of these people being pushed out of the private rented sector, the private rented sector will shrink. And because it will shrink, what will move into its place is the social housing associations. So slowly but surely, you move from the private sector renting to the public sector. Now, there would be advantages of this. I personally think that council houses were phenomenal. Council estates are brilliant. We used to take the mick out of them in the 80s, but by God, did we regret them when they were gone. I think that we should be building more council houses, but not in this environment. Not in the environment when they will only ever go to migrants. Now, look at the property here that I live in. Those 23 properties earmarked for people who had only just moved to the United Kingdom. And in one case, there was one lady who moved in, somebody was thrown out, and one lady moved in, and she said that she had received the property, she'd been allocated it when she still lived in Lahore, Pakistan. And she was a senior official at the tax inspectorate in Pakistan and was planning to use this council house, social house, housing association, as a holiday home in Windsor. Can you believe that? The people with this parish, Clewar, had bought and paid for those properties for the poor of our own community. Not a chance. They're now being used as holiday homes for people from Lahore, Pakistan. And by the way, the chairman of the residents was thrown out. Her property is now an Airbnb, which I would argue is not an acceptable use of a social housing property. But anyway, that's the way it's going to go now, isn't it? Sadiq runs a racist authority. And I'm going to tell you why I call Sadiq's a racist authority, though many of you have heard before. It's called a style guide. Every single organisation has a style guide. I'm surprised you don't have one, given that everybody now is interested in personal narrative. But a style guide essentially says something like, Grant Mitchell won't drink champagne in a pub, in EastEnders, right? And it's down to, I don't know, Danny Dyer's character would never wear a dicky bow. And it explains what people wear, what they drink, what they do, whatever, for any brand, product, actor, whatever. In the case of Greater London Authority, as you know, they said that white families should not be shown as a representation of what it is to be a Londoner. Now, I have to say to you, I think it's a reasonable point to make that if every advert was just white people, that would not be a fair reflection of London. But at the same time, it's not a fair reflection of London to say that nobody's white. What that actually is, in many respects, I think is bullying people out. Because when you say to me, or when you say to anybody, black and Asian people felt felt a level of low-level unwelcomeness because you'd never see a black or Asian person on TV, fine. I mean, if you never see a white person on TV, one would assume that that would be exactly the same thing. And what people forget is, as Elon Musk tweeted today, white people are a minority. 100 years ago, 35% of the world were white. It is now just 8% and falling. Now, part of that is because of population explosions in certain parts of the world. But at the same time, I do think that we should be concerned about the fact that we're being pushed out. And then you've got this question about racism and race and ethnicity. Look, you know what? My mum's Irish, my dad's half Greek. My mum's Irishness is probably because she's a Jacobite Scot rather than a genuine Irish person. She's from Belfast. My dad's Greek, but then again, Greece was invaded by Crusaders. So, you know, part of his Greekness is actually French. And in any case, his dad was a walker from Yorkshire, which means in practice he was one of the Scots that came south. Okay, so I'm about as mixed as you can be in the United Kingdom. And so I don't think we should be obsessed with race. What we should use race for, what we should use colour of skin for, is an indicating factor, right? So, you know, I'm sure lots of people are patriotic, but when you go to an area like what happened with Robert Jenrick, and he said, look, you know, nobody who's here is white, then that is just an indication of the way an area is changing. I personally believe that everywhere should be mixed, at least to some extent. And I think that there's nothing at all wrong with that. But where is this policy going? Well, I think the policy is going in a very simple direction. And I know the language in this video is awkward, and every video like this is awkward. But, you know, even if it's people from the Caribbean, the people who are properly British, the people who've been here for multiple generations, are being pushed out. That is a fact, in favour of people who were simply born abroad. Now, we tend to conflate born in Britain as white and born abroad as Pakistani. That's not true in every single case, obviously, but what it means is that the population, the white population, or rather, the indigenous British population, or the British-born population of London is falling. Number of white people in London is 38%, number of people that identify as white British. And fundamentally, you know, we shouldn't sit there and say that we are unwilling to defend Britishness, because I go back at the end of this video as I close it to where I started. I don't believe for 1 second that Sadiq Khan is interested at all in whiteness, in ethnicity, in race, or in housing. I don't think he's interested in any of those things. That's not why he's a racist. The reason he's a racist is because he wants to create a whole new Britain. He sees Britain in the same way as the American settlers saw the United States, what later became the United States of America. They didn't see the Navajo, the Sioux, or any of those people as a valid group of people to be respected and remembered. It was simply virgin territory on which to build their new Jerusalem. And in the case of Sadiq Khan, that is precisely what he wants to do in London. And the reason he wants to push out the Cockneys is not because they're Jews, it's not because they're white, it's not because of any of those things. It's because they're against him, as he perceives. Look at the ULEZ in Bromley. There's no doubt that if you take the tube, you will be subject to worse particulates than if you drive to work, or even if you walk to work next to a crowded road. But he wanted to attack Bromley anyway with that ULEZ, because it's always about the other with him. He knows that if he has a city that is predominantly Muslim in London, he knows that they'll be forced to vote on religious and ethnic grounds. That's his strategy, and that's what he's attempting to do. And here's the one thing that I want to say to you more than anything else. Your taxpayers' money is being spent on all of this social housing, and all of it is going in order to ensure that Britain is no longer British. That is something that is a lamentable fact. Now, I will give you some good news about the property that I'm in. For those of you that watch the channel regularly, you'll know this already. What happened was, naughty, every single tenant who was about to be thrown out in favour of Pakistani all complained that their houses were not being properly maintained. And unfortunately, if your property is not being properly maintained and there's an outstanding complaint before the letter arrives for a no-fault eviction, there can't be a no-fault eviction. And I'm willing to bet you a tenner that the Royal Borough of Windsor and Maidenhead will ensure that the inspections will not pass any of those properties until it is illegal to have a no-fault eviction. So that has saved 23 families from being put out on the streets in an ethnic cleansing effort, but it will not save the people of London. And that is an absolute disgrace. Until next time, please do donate to the Patriot Fund. See you later. Goodbye.